Hello everyone, welcome back to Doing Bart Things, and today I've got a couple of little articles here that I thought I would talk about. This is just sort of off the cuff, and I'm going to try to keep it, again, short and concise. I've had a really hard time with that in endeavoring to just have a YouTube channel where I just talk about stuff. Lately it's just been kind of a rant fest at these GPU prices. I'm going to kind of do that a little bit again as well, but for kind of a different perspective. I've got two articles here today. One is these modders are awesome, man. They are really getting after it. They added 6 gigs of memory to a 5600 XT with some kind of interesting results. I want to talk about this real quick because one thing that it does demonstrate is the fact that, yes, graphics RAM on a graphics card is tied to its longevity a bit. Because as things go up in detail, as resolutions increase for displays that people use on average, the ability for that GPU that's maybe a couple generations old now, to continue its level playing field as far as quality, you may have to turn it down a step here or there, but for it to keep coming back with acceptable frame rates, year over year is going to be a little bit tied to how big this memory buffer is. The VRAM. Now, in this article, they took a RX 5600 XT, so that's not even quote unquote last gen. That's kind of the gen before last. And I played around with a 5700 XT, if memory serves. Really good card, honestly. It was a Sapphire. For a 5700 XT, it was a really big card. It was the top end Sapphire card for that generation. I think it had 8 gigs of VRAM, if I'm not mistaken. I think. Anyway, 5600 XT comes with 6 gigs on a 192-bit bus, and they increased that to 12 gigs. And they ran kind of an interesting test. It definitely was one that is 100% going to stress the amount of memory it's got on there. So I don't want you to, it's not, wow, they got 2 times the performance. They got 2 times the performance at this benchmark at 10K resolution. That's basically it's double 4K. So that's why the score is so low. Like, these would normally be in the, thousands range, and it's hundreds, right? So they basically doubled the score in this superposition test at 10,000 resolution. Now, this is a very unrealistic benchmark. Nobody has a 5600 XT is going to play at 10K. God, I hope not. I feel sorry for you if you are. Maybe you could play, I don't know. I don't know what you're going to try to do at 10K with a 5600 XT. It's going to be bad times in most games. This is more of, I think, gives you an idea of the difference, right? It may not be 2 times, right? It may not be double the performance, but you might get an extra 10 or 20% that would allow you to use that GPU for a much longer time. And the reason is, I kind of view it as, if something gets under 60 frames per second at the resolution that you want to play at, that's usually when it's like, all right, you can probably start thinking of an upgrade. 60 to 100 frames per second is where I like to fall, especially playing your, let's say single player games, role-playing games, adventure games, where I want to be immersed in the environments and really enjoy the graphics. First-person shooters, honestly, it's kind of not that big a deal just to turn the settings down and get yourself some more frame rates. And in a lot of these games, these modern games, there's so many little knobs to turn to get your performance up that you can figure it out usually. But when you kind of get to that game that you want to play that gives you some sort of immersive experience, and this is just from my personal experience, and you can't get past that 60 frames per second mark, or you're getting big time differences. So your 1% lows is what they're called when like that. I'm so glad that it wasn't. It's been a while now, but when they started to actually do 1% lows in benchmarks, where they show, okay, here's the lowest frame rate that we experienced, it gives you an idea of how the frame rate bounces around, you know, because looking at one scene to another is different. When you look at an open field that has a bunch of stuff in it, that GPU is having to render all the trees, it's having to render all the things happening in that environment. Your frame rate is going to be lower than if you just walk up and stare at a wall, right? Because it just doesn't have to render as much. So, understanding that there's a variance in frame rate will also help you to understand why, like, this extra memory plays a role. It's not necessarily the end all be all, but it does play a role when you start turning up resolution, detail. And I think as time goes on with more and more modern games that are ports from these more modern consoles, especially when a developer they choose not to optimize crazily for PC. I think, again, this memory is going to just become more and more important. And I think this sort of shows it here. Again, this is an exaggerated outcome stat-wise, like number-wise, simply because they use 10K resolution to magnify that. Because this is such a low-end GPU, I wouldn't say such a low-end GPU, but it is definitely a lower-end GPU. I think if they were running it at, like, say, 1080p, you wouldn't see that much different. The one with 12 gigs would probably win, but the score would only reflect a much smaller percentage. It wouldn't be double. But then when you crank up the resolution and the detail, that difference becomes larger. And I think that's a pretty good demonstration of that. So I thought that was pretty cool. And these guys put a lot of work in to mod this GPU to put the 12 gig of memory on there. That is not something you just undertake. You got to really know what you're doing. I don't think you're going to go and just get your dad's soldering gun out of the closet and do this, so to speak. Maybe, but not something I would probably undertake on a piece of hardware that I paid money for. Maybe if it was really old, like if it was a 5600 XT that you had laying around, you're like, man, I just don't want to upgrade. It's really hard to justify not just upgrading. This is a scientific or, testing kind of deal. Really cool. Moving on, I found this interesting. So, Nvidia is going to likely use a AD103 core or chip for its 4070s with the same specs. So what does this mean? Well, AD103 is a bigger chip than AD104. AD103, I don't know if AD103 is what they're using for the TIs. I didn't think about that, but I wonder if that's the case. So the AD104 is what they have been using, and the so the AD101 I think is for the 4080 and 4090. Maybe it's not. I wonder if it says here. Let me have the same spec core. Huh. That's crazy. So if the 4080 and the 4090 are using AD103s, I can't see how an AD103 would be for a 4090. It's got to be bigger than that, I would think. So in a previous video, and I'll explain it briefly again here, whenever these manufacturers come out with a new architecture, they'll label it like, they'll put AD, they'll put GA. There'll be some sort of letter designation. It's AD because I think it's Ada Lovelace, I think is the code name or something. Anyway, so they call it AD and then they put a number after it, right? The smaller the number, the bigger the core. So AD100 would technically be the entire full core, fully enabled. Not the entire core, I'm sorry, the full chip enabled with all cores, all cache, all everything, right? It would be everything they could fit on there. They've chosen to make for the architecture all on there. All the CUDA cores, because basically, a GPU kind of has a bunch of more simple cores that all work in tandem, and essentially all of these little cores would be enabled on the lower number. And then you would get like an AD102 or AD101, and you have your AD103, AD104, 5, and 6. So we know for a fact that the 4060s are the AD106, okay, which designates that they are the smallest, or not the smallest, but they're definitely a smaller core from the, like say, 4070, which had the AD104. And now they're talking about using the AD103 for the 4070. So it makes you wonder if maybe the yields aren't as good on that as they thought. And so what they're doing is they're going to salvage some of those cores, some of those chips, by disabling the cores that didn't come out well, and then making those 4070s. Chip makers do this all the time. This is not anything new. Not anything new at all. It's kind of why you have the different models in the first place. It's why like you have the 4080 and 4090, is because a 4080, they can make a 4080 out of a failed 4090, right? That's kind of how that works. So that's kind of what they're doing there. That's an interesting move, that they are going to upgrade the core and keep the performance the same. I kind of almost wonder if they are preparing in the back, if they're putting in the back pocket that they could just enable more AD103 cores on the 4070 and do an upgrade to a, well, they've already got the 4070 Ti. So what would they do there? Could that be a 4070 Super version maybe? Would that be something that they're thinking about doing? Possibly. And with an AD103 core, obviously because it has just more cores on there, as time goes on, your yields get better and better. So these cores that they're using for this GPU, basically they get a higher and higher yield. More and more of the cores on the overall chip are good, and so the temptation there is, why are we disabling all these cores? We could just enable them, right, and have a better GPU, and it would make it reasonable and simple for them to potentially slap like a super label on there, enable more of the cores, and be like, hey, this is a new version of the 4070. That could be a possibility. They could be preparing to release a they may, again, it may just be that their yields aren't as good as they like, for AD103, and so they're figuring out a way to use all of those chips, which is, okay, we're going to make some 4070s with it. And if that's what they're doing, they're the same cores. There's just, the AD103 is probably having to be cut down a bit more to get to a level that's the same as a 4070. So, like, I don't think between those two cores you're going to see much difference. There might be some inherent differences with one maybe clocking up slightly higher than the other one, although their clocks will be based on how good they are anyway. If you win the quote-unquote silicone lottery, it won't matter. Yeah, so I don't know. I thought that was interesting. I could see both good and bad things coming from that. I still think all these GPUs are way too expensive. everything is out of control of the GPU market. It's kind of like all the other, I mean, all the other main components are fine. Like they're priced within sort of a expected expectation. Motherboards have gotten really expensive, and are kind of leaning into the same realm as video cards a bit, with some of the ridiculousness going on there. But storage is pretty affordable. CPUs, I think, are competing very well between Intel and AMD, and some of the pricing there, I think, is pretty good and competitive. Memory has gotten really competitive. Cases, I mean, there are some amazing cases, enclosures for around $100 now. So I don't think that that's too far out of bounds as far as price to what you get. So really, for me, it's it's definitely the GPU that right now that is. I just got to turn your nose up and buy one of these cards. I mean, good luck to you. So anyway, that's it. I just thought that that was interesting. That could have some implications for the future. Thought I pointed out that there is a version of the 4070 that's going to use this AD103 core. I may go and do some research and find out if which core the 4070 Ti is using. Be curious to see if it's already on the 103. I wonder if we can look that up real quick. No. AD104. That's interesting. That's really interesting. So the TI is using the AD104. So that's really interesting. Interesting. Okay. Well, is what it is. All right, guys. That was it. I just want to point out those two things. That might bore you to tears, but we'll see. Hopefully more exciting content coming soon. Something I was thinking about that could be easy enough to pull off is maybe making a, perhaps once a month, kind of at the same time, making like doing a PC part picker list, building a couple different machines. Maybe I'll do one for like a suggested or possible $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 rig, something like that. Like, hey, what do I suggest? I don't know. I'm still playing with the idea. If you have any suggestions or comments, feel free to leave them. If you like and subscribe, that's amazing. I really appreciate that you actually took time to listen to my rantings on this decidedly low rent production. Thank you again, and have a great day.